Hey, Stephen, some of the matchups were announced in regards to kickoff times and networks this week for Bama. So, what we have here is a week one game against Western Kentucky that's on ESPN in prime time. And then, of course, we know what happened with South Florida. That was a scare down there in Tampa last year. That game is a primetime ESPN affair. And then an interesting one for Bama that they experienced actually a couple of years ago against Texas when they were on the big noon kickoff on Fox, but this time against the Big Ten and Wisconsin at Camp Randall Stadium at 11 Central, local time there. So, your thoughts about the early season schedule announcements?
Right now, I mean, you look at you get two in Western Kentucky and South Florida that you can prepare for prior to going to Camp Randall Stadium in Madison, Wisconsin. I go back to that South Florida game. That was a scare. You got Byron Brown back at quarterback for South Florida, and he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in college football. I think he finished last year with over 30 total touchdowns and 11 picks. He finished with over 3,000 passing yards. You got that young man back, and he can play. But that week three matchup against Wisconsin, you're going up there to face Luke Fickell. Fox Big Noon has it. So it's an 11 a.m. kickoff. The Badgers have a lot of talent, especially on defense coming back. That's going to be your first big road test in the Kalen DeBoer era. That was going to be fun.
And then, of course, after the bye week, that Georgia game has already been slated for a primetime affair. And when those two get together, the college football world shakes.
It does, and I mentioned this on my show in my own words, as you mentioned, Mark, that Georgia Kirby Smart is looking at this situation as Saban's retired. Here is my chance to make Georgia the gold standard. Here is my chance. Here's my window to make Georgia the measuring stick and the program that everybody has to model after in college football. With Nick Saban saying, I'm hanging up my coaching shoes, Kirby Smart is looking at this going, how can I seize this window? How can I seize the moment? So that week four matchup coming off of a bye week when Georgia travels to Tuscaloosa, everybody's eyeballs will be on that game. Can Kalen DeBoer get one over Kirby Smart? Can Kirby come to Tuscaloosa and get a big win? That's going to be a huge one.
And Stephen, before we let you go, we've got a question coming in here from Matthew Miller that says, where does Stephen think Bama finishes in the SEC this year? And I don't want to put you on the spot because maybe you haven't made your predictions, but who does he think competes year in and year out going forward in the SEC?
Well, I'll take the second one first, who competes year in and year out. Of course, Alabama's going to compete year in and year out. Of course, Georgia's going to be right there. You look at Texas with Steve Sarkisian; they're going to be in there. I think if Missouri continues on this trajectory from last year, they have a question in there. I think Tennessee, if Nico Yamaleva, if Nico continues to grow and Josh Heupel pushes forward, Tennessee has a shot to be in there. So those are the programs I see competing year in and year out there in the SEC. Maybe Texas A&M, we'll see. Every time we put Texas A&M in that conversation, they don't seem to produce. So we'll see if Texas A&M can finally crack in there. In terms of where Bama finishes this year, I'm going to hold off on that one, have not quite made that prediction yet. I kind of want to see how do these guys look when fall camp comes in. So once August camp comes in and I'm out there and I'm seeing quite a few of these practices and how these different position groups look, but I will have my thought there, Matthew, on that first question.
Stephen, we so much appreciate you and you dropping by here to talk SEC football and talk Bama. You can catch Stephen in my own words Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6:30 Central Time, right here on YouTube. You're a click away from Stephen every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 6:30 Central. Stephen, it's always a pleasure. Great to have you, sir, as always.
Appreciate you, Mark. You take care, man.
And even though this comment by Matthew was not directed toward me, that's my show. I'll answer this one myself. I don't know that anything has given us any indication in the SEC or across college football of the haves and the have-nots changing. The only game changer in the SEC in the last couple of years has been that Nick Saban has stepped down at Alabama. We'll see if Kalen DeBoer, we know that he's good. We know that he's good at what he does. I think he's proven that both at Washington, Fresno State, his previous stops, FCS play. He's a really good coach. Greatest of all time. So there's a step down there to some degree, and with the more difficult schedules with Oklahoma and Texas. So the Alabama standard has to be put into some kind of context in rating Kalen DeBoer and what Alabama can do going forward. I don't think Nick Saban, if he was we were going to take 15 years off his life and turn him into Nick Saban at 55 years old, and he shows up at Alabama, is he going to be able to duplicate what he did for the previous 15 years? So there has to be some context there. I think the biggest change in SEC football is at Texas. That Texas finally, we believe, based on, it's only one season, but based on one season, that if Texas is truly back, then Texas is the one difference in SEC football. Now, of course, Oklahoma historically is a better program than Texas, but that's historically. That doesn't mean right now, and they don't. I do believe Oklahoma has roughly a top 15 program in college football, and Texas more of a top 5 to 8 program in college football. So that is the obvious difference to SEC football, but it's more about Texas right now, in my eyes, than it is about Oklahoma. And for the rest of those programs, Stephen makes a point about Missouri, but I'm going to have to see it back-to-back years because I think this is more about Missouri just having good quarterback, running back, wide receiver play to put together with a really good front seven on defense is what they had last year. And it looks like they're going to maintain that for 2 years. Now, you might be off and running at Mizzou, but they're always going to be behind the 8 ball in recruiting out of high school. But high school recruiting, for as important as it is not 90% of the equation anymore. It's 60, 70% of the equation, ballpark. So maybe programs like Missouri, the transfer portal is going to aid them in bridging the gap that they have in trying to keep up with the likes of the deep South schools in the SEC and their recruiting advantage. Arkansas's had issues with that. Missouri's had issues with that. Those two, first and foremost, in recruiting, because they just don't have the players in state. And say what you will about national recruiting, players still generally stay close to home.